Welcome to Battleground Times. This is where war turns into dark. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Thank you for your support. Now, let's begin. The rescue was not a hero's welcome. It was a surgical extraction performed with the cold precision of a crime scene cleanup. When the extraction birds finally pierced the Alaskan fog 4 hours after the pyramid vanished, they weren't standard pave hawks. These were unmarked, matte black frames equipped with sensor arrays that hummed at a frequency that made Varnum's teeth ache. "Do not speak. Do not remove your gear. Do not interact with the flight crew," the lead recovery officer barked over the roaring rotors. He wore a hazard suit that looked more suited for a lunar landing than a mountain rescue. As the helicopter lifted away from the crater, Varnum looked down. From the air, the waiting place looked like a scarred eye. The hole where the pyramid had been was perfectly circular, a black pupil staring back at the sky. She felt a tug in her chest, a physical pull toward that void that made her stomach churn. Beside her, the two recovered pilots from Hawthorne 7 sat like statues. They were breathing, but their eyes remained fixed on the ceiling of the chopper, tracking movements that weren't there. Every few seconds, their skin would flicker with a faint subcutaneous light, as if a ghost were trying to signal from beneath their flesh. "They're still connected," Thorne whispered next to her. His voice was a dry rasp. He was clutching the Tlingit stone so hard his knuckles were white. "The door closed, but the bridge is still inside us, Captain." "Shut it down, Thorne," Varnum said, though her own hand was trembling. "We're out." "It's over, is it?" Thorne turned to look at her. In the dim red light of the cabin, his irises didn't reflect the light, they absorbed it. The descent into Elmendorf Air Force Base was a blur of fluorescent lights and shouted orders. They weren't taken to the infirmary. They were driven in a blacked-out van to a sub-level hangar, a place that didn't exist on any base map. Varnum was separated from her team immediately. She was led into a sterile white room that smelled of industrial bleach and ozone. Across the table sat Colonel Barnes, but he wasn't alone. Beside him sat a man in a charcoal suit, his face a mask of bureaucratic indifference. "Captain Varnum," Barnes began. He didn't look her in the eye. He was studying a folder that was already an inch thick. "Report," Varnum told them. She told them about the magnetic anomalies, the geometry that broke the mind, the witness, and the conversion of Clove and the Hawthorne crew. She told them about the stone, and how it had been the only thing that felt real in a place made of lies. When she finished, the room remained silent for a long minute. The man in the suit leaned forward. "Captain, let's be very clear," the man said. His voice was smooth, like oil. "There was no pyramid. There was no witness. You and your team were exposed to a highly concentrated experimental neurochemical agent released from the Hawthorne 7's experimental cargo. You suffered a collective hallucination brought on by extreme hypoxia and chemical poisoning." At him, she felt the blue light pulse beneath her collarbone, a warm, angry throb. "I watched a man turn into glass. I felt the ground breathe. Are you telling me my entire team shared a 14-hour dream about relativistic physics?" "I'm telling you what the official record will state," the man replied. "And I'm telling you that your team, what's left of it, is currently being treated for chemical exposure. If you value their pensions, their reputations, and their lives, you will sign this non-disclosure agreement, level 0. If you even whisper about pyramids in your sleep, you'll find yourself in a dark room for the rest of your natural life." "And Clove?" Varnum's voice was a low growl. "What do I tell his family?" "Sergeant Clove was killed in the crash, lost in a crevasse during the recovery effort. His body was never found." Varnum stood up, the chair screeching against the tile. "He's in the walls of that thing. He's part of a machine that is trying to eat this world." "The thing is gone, Captain," Barnes said, finally looking up. His eyes held a flicker of pity or perhaps fear. "There is nothing in that valley but snow. We sent a drone over 30 minutes ago. The crater is empty. The readings are normal. Whatever was there, it left." "It didn't leave," Varnum whispered, looking at her hands. "It moved. They kept her in isolation for 3 weeks. Every day was a cycle of blood draws, psychological evaluations, and re-education sessions where they showed her photos of the empty crater until she felt her brain begin to fracture. On the 22nd day, She was allowed to see her team in the rehab garden, a small enclosed courtyard with high concrete walls and a sliver of Alaskan sky. Rivera was sitting on a bench staring at his hands. The skin on his palms was shedding in large gray flakes, revealing a shimmering pearl scent layer beneath that looked more like motherboard traces than muscle. "It doesn't itch," Rivera said as Varnum sat beside him. "It just feels right, like I'm finally shedding a suit that was too small." "Don't say that, Rivera," Varnum said, though she felt the same sensation. "We're human. We stay human, are we?" Duvant asked, joining them. She was wearing sunglasses, even though the sky was overcast. When she pulled them down, Varnum saw that her pupils had become geometric hexagonal instead of round. "I can hear the base's electrical grid, Captain. I can hear the thoughts of the computers in the data center. They're screaming. Everything we built is so loud, so inefficient." Harrison and Montrose were there too. Montrose looked 20 years older, his hair gone white, but his eyes were burning with a feverish light. "They're studying us," Montrose whispered, leaning in. "They think they're observing hallucination survivors, but they're terrified. I saw the lab reports. Our DAA is changing, Celeste. The pyramid didn't just touch us. It started a process that can't be stopped. We are the first iterations of the new architecture." Looking around the small courtyard, the team went silent. "He's gone," Cale Plinga said. He was leaning against the wall, the only one who didn't look changed, though he looked deeply weary. He walked out of his room last night. The cameras didn't see him. The motion sensors didn't trip. It was like he just slid between the frames of the world. Varnum felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. Thorne had been the furthest along. He had seen the heart. "The colonel says we're being discharged," Varnum told them. "Medical, full benefits, but we have to sign. We have to be silent." "I'll sign," Rivera said, a strange, distant smile on his face. "I want to go home. I want to see how the world looks now." "I won't." Club's name was on the tip of her tongue, but she caught herself. "I won't let them pretend this didn't happen, Captain," Cale said, walking over to her. He pressed the Tlingit stone back into her hand. "You must sign. You must go back into the world, because when the other doors open, and they will, you're the only ones who will know what the witness looks like. You are the early warning system now." Varnum looked at the stone. It was cold again, silent. But as she gripped it, she felt a faint vibration, a tiny echo of the pyramid's heartbeat. The discharge was swift. Within 48 hours, Varnum was standing at the gates of Elmendorf with a duffel bag and a bus ticket. She was a civilian. A ghost. She took a bus to a small motel on the outskirts of Anchorage. She needed to think. She needed to plan. But as she sat on the edge of the bed in the flickering light of the room's neon sign, she felt a presence. She turned. Thorne was standing in the corner of the room. He wasn't there in the traditional sense. His body seemed to shimmer, his edges blurring into the wallpaper. He was wearing the same hospital gown he'd escaped in, but his skin was now the color of the pyramid, deep, light-absorbing obsidian. "Rian," she whispered, her hand moving toward the knife she'd hidden under her pillow. "Don't," Thorne said. His voice didn't come from his mouth, it vibrated in the air around her. "I'm not here to hurt you, Celeste. I'm here to tell you that the witness was right." "The witness was a monster, Thorne. The witness was a map," Thorne replied. He stepped into the light. He was beautiful and terrifying, a creature of geometry and shadow. "The earth is breaking. The climate, the tectonic plates, the magnetic field, it's all failing. The pyramids aren't invading, they're lifeboats." "Lifeboats that kill the soul?" "The soul is just data, Captain. It can be transferred. It can be saved." Thorne moved toward the window, looking out at the city lights. "There are others. In the Gobi, under the ice in Antarctica, in the deep trenches of the Pacific. They're all waking up. The nuclear tests, the warming poles. We've rung the dinner bell." Forney turned it back to her. His hexagonal pupils pulsed with a soft blue light. "Because you have the stone, you have the anchor. You're the only thing that can keep the transition from being a slaughter. You have to find the others. You have to lead the changed." "I'm a soldier, Thorne, not a messiah for monsters. Not by running or fading, but by folding into a space that shouldn't have been there." Varnum stood in the middle of the room, alone. She looked in the mirror. She pulled back her sleeve. The blue light was brighter tonight. It was tracing a map on her arm, a series of geometric lines that pointed toward the horizon. She picked up the stone. She picked up her bag. First rule of engagement, she whispered to the empty room, or you know the terrain. She walked out into the Alaskan night, her eyes already beginning to see the shadows between the stars. The year following the Alaskan incident was a descent into a global twilight. To the public, it was the year of the anomaly. Unprecedented seismic activity rattled the Pacific Rim. Aurora displays were seen as far south as the equator, shimmering with an unsettling violet hue. But to Celesta Varnum, it was the year of the awakening. She lived out of a reinforced van, a mobile command center shielded by lead and copper mesh. She had become a ghost hunter, but the ghosts she hunted were made of geometry and obsidian. Following the map etched in blue light beneath her skin, she had traveled from the high deserts of the Atacama to the submerged ruins of the Yonaguni Monument. Everywhere she went, the story was the same. The earth was cracking open and the lifeboats were rising. They're not just structures anymore, Celeste. Duvant's voice crackled over an encrypted satellite link. Marisol was calling from a high-tech bunker in Geneva. They're broadcasting a synchronized signal. It's a countdown. I've run the math through every model I have. When that clock hits 0, the dimensional membrane doesn't just thin, it dissolves. How long? Marisol Varnum asked, staring out at the horizon of the Gobi Desert, where a black spire had emerged from the dunes only 48 hours prior. 6 hours, maybe less. The Pentagon knows. The Kremlin knows. They're preparing to strike the sites with tactical nukes. They think they can blow the doors shut. Varnum gripped the steering wheel. It won't work. The more energy you feed those things, the faster they convert it. A nuke won't destroy a pyramid, it'll just give it the fuel to finish the bridge. Then what do we do? Varnum looked at the Tlingit stone sitting on her dashboard. It was vibrating, a low hum that resonated with the blue lines on her arm. We do what we did in Alaska. We provide a counter-resonance. We remind the world it belongs to the living, not the architects. The pyramid here was even larger than the one in Alaska, a terrifying monument to a logic that predated the stars. She wasn't alone. As she stepped out of the van, figures emerged from the swirling dust. Rivera, his skin now a shimmering metallic gray. Harrison, whose eyes glowed with a soft medical-grade luminescence. And Thorn, or the thing that had once been Orion Thorn, flickering in and out of the twilight like a glitch in reality. The squad is back together, River said, his voice sounding like a chorus of humming wires. We're the only ones who can get close enough, Thorn said, his form stabilizing for a moment. The military's drones are crashing miles out. The electronic interference is too high, but we were part of the system now. We have the clearance. Are we stopping it or joining it? Harrison asked, looking at the towering black face of the spire. Or redefining it. We're going to use the anchor to poison the signal. If we can inject a human frequency into their network at the moment of transition, we can stall the conversion. We can give humanity time to adapt on our own terms. The shadow of the van. He looked frail, his body nearly transparent. To broadcast a signal that strong, we have to become the antennas. We have to let the pyramid take us, and then fight from the inside. Varnum looked at her team, her changed family. We were soldiers once. We signed up to protect the world. That contract hasn't expired. They walked toward the pyramid. This time, there was no witness to greet them. The structure was open, a massive, yawning triangular gate that pulsed with a blinding violet light. The sound was deafening now, the heartbeat of a dying dimension, desperate for a new home. As they entered the central chamber, the void heart was already fully active. It wasn't a sphere anymore. It was a tearing hole in the air, revealing a glimpse of the other side. Varnum saw a world of impossible beauty and cold, mathematical perfection, a place where entropy had been defeated, but where the soul was just a variable in an equation. They formed the circle around the void heart. They linked hands. The moment they connected, the pyramid's energy surged through them. It was an agony beyond description. Varnum felt her memories being stripped away her first day at the academy, the smell of her mother's kitchen, the heat of the sun on her face. The pyramid was trying to optimize her, to delete the noise of her humanity. No, she thought, clutching the stone in the center of the circle. The noise is the point. She projected the feeling of the stone, the weight of the earth. The coldness of the Alaskan snow, the grief of losing Clove, the stubborn, irrational love for her team. She fed the pyramid every inefficient human emotion she possessed. Beside her, Rivera fed it his anger. Duvant fed it her curiosity. Thorn fed it his sense of duty. The void heart began to flicker. The violet light clashed with the dull brown resonance of the stone. The other side began to blur, the geometric cities of the architects shaking as if hit by an emotional earthquake. "Stop!" the collective voice of the architects roared in their minds. "You are destroying the Ark. You are committing genocide against the infinite. We're keeping our home," Varnum screamed, her body beginning to fracture into light. The stone shattered. The explosion wasn't one of fire, but of reality. A wave of humanity blasted outward from the Gobi Desert, traveling through the network of pyramids across the globe. In Antarctica, in the Pacific, in the Andes, the black structures groaned. The doors didn't close, but they didn't fully open either. They became fixed, stuck in a state of permanent transition. The world didn't end that day, but it didn't stay the same either. The pyramids remained, silent and immovable, strange monuments in the middle of our world. They are no longer lifeboats, and they are no longer prisons. They are wait points. Captain Celesta Varnum woke up in the sand 5 miles from the Gobi site. She was alone. Her team was gone, not dead, but moved. She could still feel them in the back of her mind, guardian signals in the new global network. She looked at her arm. The blue light was gone, replaced by faint silver scars that looked like topographical maps. She was human again, mostly. But when she looked at the stars, she didn't see distant lights. She saw the architecture. The government tried to cover it up, of course. They called it the Gobi event, a freak solar flare interaction with rare earth minerals, but they couldn't hide the spires. They couldn't hide the fact that 10% of the population now had hexagonal pupils and a strange knack for predicting the weather. Varnum sits in a small cafe in Ulaanbaatar, sipping tea. She watches a young girl play with a toy plane. The girl's eyes flicker with a faint blue light, and she moves the plane with a grace that defies gravity. The conversion didn't happen all at once. It's happening slowly, a merger, a long, slow conversation between two worlds. Varnum reaches into her pocket and pulls out a fragment of the Tlingit stone. It's small, but it still feels warm. She knows the architects are still watching. She knows the doors are still there. But she also knows that as long as someone remembers the smell of the rain and the weight of a hand in theirs, the architecture will have to wait. She finishes her tea, stands up, and walks out into a world that is no longer hers, but is finally, truly ours. The end of the story? No, she whispers to the wind. Just the end of the beginning. The chamber didn't just hold the witness, it held the weight of 1 billion years. As the black sphere, the void heart, began to glow, the light it emitted wasn't bright, it was heavy, a radiance that felt like lead pressing against their skin. "Rivera, the charges!" Varnum shouted, but her voice felt like it was traveling through water. Rivera fumbled with his pack, his fingers glowing so brightly now that the skin appeared translucent, revealing the intricate lattice of his phalanges. "I can't, Captain, the C4, it's changing," Varnum looked. The blocks of plastic explosive in Rivera's hands were losing their form, the stable chemical compound softening and turning into a shimmering metallic fluid that dripped through his fingers like mercury. The pyramid was neutralizing their technology, turning their weapons of destruction into raw, inert matter. The witness stepped forward. Form was a kaleidoscope of shifting geometric shadows, a silhouette that seemed to exist in 3 dimensions while its edges flickered into a 4th. Destruction is a primitive concept. The voice vibrated inside their skulls. You seek to burn a door because you fear the room beyond, but the room is already around you. "Harrison, get to the crew," Varnum commanded, ignoring the voice. "Clove, cover him. If the rifles don't work, use your knives, use your hands." Clove let out a guttural roar, drawing a combat blade that shimmered with static. He charged the witness, a mountain of a man fueled by pure terrestrial rage. But as he swung, the witness didn't dodge, it simply expanded. Clove's blade passed through the shadow figure as if cutting through smoke, and the momentum carried him deep into the witness's flickering center. "Clove, pull back!" Varnum screamed. The Russian soldier stopped mid-motion. He didn't fall. He stayed upright, but his scream was cut short. Through the translucent shadow of the witness, the team watched in horror as Clove's gear, his vest, his radio, his helmet simply dissolved into fine gray dust. His skin began to shimmer, turning into the same obsidian glass material as the pyramid walls. I can see it," Clove whispered, his voice sounding like grinding stone. "The stars, they aren't far. They're right here." Within seconds, Clove was gone. In his place stood a pillar of black glass, a frozen statue of a soldier in a state of eternal awe. He had been integrated. He's part of the circuit now, Montrose breathed, stepping toward the statue with a terrifying fascination. He's a conductor for the energy. Look at the floor. From the base of the Clove statue, golden lines of light shot out across the floor, connecting to the void heart. The sphere pulsed with a new, aggressive rhythm. It was feeding on them. "We aren't guests," Duvant realized, her voice cracking. "We're fuel. We're the raw material it needs to finish the bridge." The witness turned its featureless face toward the rest of them. "One must be translated for the many to transcend. Your comrade has accepted the truth. Who is next to witness the unfolding?" "None of us." Varnum fired her M4. The bullets didn't hit the witness. They slowed down as they approached the sphere, suspended in midair like flies in amber, before falling harmlessly to the floor. "Captain, it's no use," Thorne yelled. He was clutching his head, blood leaking from his ears. "It's not fighting us. It's convincing us. Every cell in my body is being told to let go. It's a beautiful lie." "Don't listen to it, Orion." Varnum grabbed him, her own hands glowing with an intensity that began to sting. She remembered the stone. She shoved the ancient Tlingit artifact into Thorne's hand. "Hold this. Remember the cold. Remember the dirt." The moment Thorne touched the stone, a shock wave of reality blasted outward. The golden lines on the floor flickered. The witness recoiled, its fractal form blurring and losing its sharp edges. "That fragment," the voice hissed, no longer calm. "A remnant of the first resistance, a tether to a dying world." Cale shouted, his eyes bright with hope. "Shh! It's a piece of the earth that hasn't been touched by the waiting place. It's a literal anchor." "Harrison now!" Varnum yelled. Harrison reached the amber cocoons of the Hawthorne 7 crew. He slammed a heavy-duty medical injector into the first cocoon, but the needle snapped against the surface. "It's too hard! It's like diamond!" "Move!" Rivera pushed him aside, wielding a thermal torch that was miraculously still functioning. The blue flame hissed against the amber. "I'll cut them out or I'll die trying!" The witness shrieked, a sound like tectonic plates grinding together. It lunged for Rivera, but Varnum stepped into its path. She didn't use her gun. She held the stone aloft, her knuckles white, her heart hammering against her ribs. She challenged, the blue light of the pyramid clashing with the dull brown warmth of the stone. "Look at me. I am Captain Celesta Varnum. I am flesh and bone and blood, and I do not give you permission to rewrite me." The light from the stone and the light from the pyramid met in a violent clash of energies. The catwalk groaned. The black glass beneath their feet began to spiderweb. "Captain, the floor is giving way," Duvant warned. "Rivera, hurry!" The thermal torch finally pierced the first cocoon. The pilot of Hawthorne 7 fell forward, coughing up a thick, luminescent fluid. His eyes were wide and blue, but as Harrison grabbed him, the blue began to fade, replaced by the dull, human brown of shock. "One down," Harrison yelled. 3 to go. But the pyramid was reacting to the theft of its fuel. The 12 pillars of light began to rotate, creating a centrifugal force that tried to pull everyone toward the void heart in the center. "I can't hold on," Duvant screamed as she was lifted off her feet, her body drifting toward the black sphere. "Marisol." Thorne lunged, catching her ankle, his other hand gripping the railing of the catwalk. The witness ignored the others and focused entirely on Varnum and the stone. Its form became jagged, needles of shadow lashing out like whips. "Or you cling to a grain of sand while we offer the ocean. The earth is a cage of rot. We offer the architecture of the infinite." "I like my rot," Varnum snarled. She felt her skin cracking, the obsidian lattice trying to overwrite her DNA, but she pushed the stone forward. "I like my mess. I like being able to fail." She slammed the stone against the nearest pillar of light. The impact was like a thunderclap. The pillar shattered into a million shards of golden glass. The entire chamber tilted. The void heart let out a low, mourning moan. "It's destabilizing," Montrose shouted, his fear finally replaced by scientific calculation. "You're breaking the resonance. If you break 3 more pillars, the bridge will collapse." "You heard the man," Varnum yelled, her vision blurring as the blue light tried to claim her eyes. Break the pillars. Break the cage. But as they moved to the next pillar, the witness did something terrible. It stopped being a shadow. It began to take on the shapes of their loved ones. To Rivera, it looked like his sister. To Thorne, it was his fallen squad members from Afghanistan. To Varnum, it was her father, standing in the light, reaching out with a hand that looked warm and real. "Celeste," the figure said. Its voice no longer a vibration, but a perfect mimicry of a man she hadn't seen in 20 years. "Stop fighting. You're so tired. Just let go. Come home." Varnum's arm wavered. The stone felt heavy, almost too heavy to hold. The blue light felt so warm, like a sun she had been missing her entire life. "Captain, don't look at it." Cale's voice pierced the fog. "It's a mirror. It's showing you your own hunger." Varnum looked at the father standing before her. She looked at his eyes. They weren't brown. They were the same void black as the sphere. "My father is dead," she whispered, her voice hardening. "And he died a human." She swung the stone with every ounce of strength she had left. The second pillar shattered. The witness let out a final, soul-piercing scream as its form began to unravel, the fractals spinning off into the darkness of the chamber. The gravity reversed again, slamming everyone back down onto the catwalk. "Two more!" River yelled, dragging the second pilot out of his cocoon. But the pyramid was done playing. The walls began to contract. The chamber was shrinking, the black glass folding inward like a closing fist. They were out of time. "We have to go! Now!" Varnum ordered. "Leave the rest! We have to! We have to move!" "We can't leave them," Harrison protested, looking at the two remaining cocoons. "They're gone, Harrison! Look at them!" Varnum pointed. The remaining two crewmen were no longer human. Their faces had smoothed over, their features disappearing into the black glass of the pillars. They were no longer being translated. They were finished. The witness, now a tattered shroud of shadow, pursued them. Its voice a dying whisper in the wind. "You have delayed the dawn, but the sun is already rising." They burst through the triangular opening just as the pyramid's entrance sealed shut with a sound like a tombstone being slammed into place. They didn't stop. They ran until they hit the ridge, collapsing into the snow as the ground beneath them began to swallow itself. Varnum looked back. The Black Pyramid wasn't just collapsing, it was being erased. In a final, silent implosion of violet light, the structure vanished, leaving nothing but a perfectly circular, bottomless hole in the Alaskan ice. 7 soldiers, or what was left of them, and 2 survivors who would never be the same. Varnum looked at her hand. The glow was still there, faint, pulsing under her skin. She gripped the stone, but it was cold now, dark and silent. "Is it over?" Duvant whispered, shivering in the 40-degree wind. Varnum looked at the hole in the earth, then up at the stars, which seemed just a little bit closer than they had yesterday. "No," Varnum said, her voice echoing in the vast frozen silence. "I think it's just beginning." The descent toward the structure felt less like walking and more like being pulled by an invisible tide. As the team moved down the ridge toward the base of the Black Pyramid, the environmental anomalies escalated from unsettling to impossible. "Captain, look at the snow," Thorne whispered, his voice sounding thin, as if the air was refusing to carry the vibration of his vocal cords. Varnum looked down. Around the perimeter of the pyramid, the snow wasn't melting. It was sublimating directly into a heavy violet mist that clung to the ground. But more disturbingly, the snowflakes weren't falling. They were drifting upward, caught in a localized gravitational reversal that made every step feel light and nauseatingly unstable. "My instruments are complete junk now," Duvant reported, frustratedly tapping the screen of her ruggedized tablet. "The GPE says we're currently located in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and the internal clock is gaining 3 seconds every minute. We're losing sync with the rest of the world, ma'am." "Stay tight," Varnum ordered, her hand gripping the cold plastic of her M4. The static electricity was no longer just dancing on the barrel. It was crawling up her sleeves, making the hair on her arms stand on end.
"Harrison, watch Montrose. He's looking a little too eager."
The geologist was indeed entranced. He walked with a stumbling gait, his eyes fixed on the obsidian-like surface. "It's not stone," Montrose muttered, more to himself than the team. "It's a polarized lattice. It's absorbing every photon that hits it. It's not just black, Captain. It's a physical absence of light. They reached the base. Up close, the pyramid was gargantuan, a monolith that seemed to stretch into a sky that had turned a bruised, unnatural shade of indigo. There were no seams, no rivets, no tool marks. It looked like a single, continuous object grown rather than built. "Rivera, check for an entrance," Varnum commanded. The engineer approached the smooth surface, reaching out with a gloved hand. The moment his fingertips made contact, a ripple spread across the black face of the structure, not like a vibration, but like a wave in a dark pool of oil. "Holy!" Rivera jumped back. A section of the wall, roughly 10 feet wide, didn't slide open or swing inward. It simply faded. 1 second there was solid, impenetrable blackness. The next, there was a triangular void leading into a lightless interior. A gust of air rushed out, but it wasn't the stale, recycled air of a tomb. It was ozone-heavy and smelled of a coming storm. "Internal temperature is 72 degrees, Harrison noted, looking at the thermal scanner on his wrist. "Exactly. Not 72.1, 72 even. It's regulated. We go in," Varnum said. She saw the hesitation in Club's eyes. The big Russian was crossing himself, and the way Cale Tlinga was gripping his grandfather's stone. "We have 4 crewmen from Hawthorne 7 who might be inside. We don't leave them, Captain," Cale said, his voice a low warning. "The mountain hasn't just opened its mouth. It's inviting us to be swallowed. My people say that once you cross the shadow line, you belong to the waiting place. Then we'll just have to make sure we're too bitter to swallow, Cale. Thorn, point, Clove, rear. Let's move." The moment they crossed the threshold, the world changed. The transition was instantaneous. Behind them, the howling Alaskan wind vanished, replaced by a hum so deep it was felt in the teeth. The hallway they stood in was a geometric nightmare. The walls weren't vertical. They leaned at angles that made the inner ear scream in protest. Varnum clicked on her high-intensity tactical light. The beam should have cut through the darkness for 50 yards. Instead, the light seemed to bend, the beam curving toward the floor after only 10 feet, as if the gravity inside was warping the path of the photons themselves. "Physics has left the building," Montrose whispered, his voice filled with a terrifying mix of awe and dread. He reached out to touch a wall, his hand disappearing into a layer of shimmering distortion before touching the solid surface. "It's a non-Euclidean fold. The interior space is significantly larger than the exterior dimensions." "Captain, look at the floor," Duvant said, her voice trembling. Beneath their boots, the floor was translucent. Through the smoky glass-like material, they could see machinery, if it could be called that. Massive, rotating rings of liquid metal pulsed with a rhythmic golden light. It looked like the inner workings of a clock designed by a god who hated straight lines. They moved deeper. The corridor branched into 3 identical paths. "Which way, Scout?" Varnum asked Thorn. Thorn was standing still, his head tilted. His eyes were vacant, the pupils dilated until the blue of his irises was a thin, flickering ring. "It doesn't matter," he whispered. "All the paths are the same path. They all lead to the heart." "Orion?" "Stay with me," Varnum said, snapping her fingers in front of his face. Thorn blinked, the focus returning, but his expression remained haunted. "I can hear them, Captain. Not voices, patterns, like a song made of math. It's telling us to hurry." They chose the center path. The smooth black surface gave way to reliefs protrusions that looked like frozen lightning. "Wait," Harrison called out, stopping by a section of the wall. "Is that organic?" He pointed his light at a protrusion. It looked like a human hand, or a close approximation of one, reaching out from the black lattice. It was frozen in mid-motion, the skin made of the same obsidian material as the walls. "There's more of them," Rivera said, his voice rising in panic. He swung his light around. The corridor was lined with them distorted shapes of limbs, faces, and torsos, all appearing to emerge from or sink into the walls. They weren't statues. The detail was too high. You could see the pores, the creases in the knuckles, the expressions of agonizing transition on the faces. "Are these the people who came before?" Clove asked, his finger tightening on the trigger of his saw. "They aren't dead," Montrose said, stepping closer to a face that looked remarkably like a pilot's. "There's a heat signature. Very low, but it's there. They're in stasis. Their biology is being translated." Suddenly, the hum increased in pitch. The golden rings beneath the floor accelerated, their rotation becoming a blur of light. "Captain, my skin!" Duvant shrieked. Varnum looked at her own hands. A faint, bioluminescent glow was beginning to pulse beneath her skin, tracing the paths of her veins in a soft, ghostly blue. It didn't hurt, but it felt like 1,000 tiny needles were vibrating against her nerves. "Conversion," Thorne said, his voice flat. "The environment is preparing us. It's rewriting the code. We need to find the core and shut this down now." Varnum shouted over the rising hum. "Rivera, get the SOAR ready. If we can't find the crew, we bury this place." They broke into a run, but the corridor seemed to stretch. The faster they ran, the further away the end of the hall appeared to be. The geometry was reacting to their intent, stretching the space to keep them in the transition zone. "It's not letting us move," River yelled. "Close your eyes," Kale shouted. "Don't look at the walls. Don't look at the floor. Use the stone." Varnum grabbed the ancient stone from Kale. It was searingly hot now. She closed her eyes, clutching the rock, and focused on the feeling of the cold Alaskan wind, the smell of diesel fuel, the weight of her boots. She focused on being human. "Follow my voice," she commanded the team. "Don't trust your eyes. Move toward the sound." They stumbled forward blindly, a chain of soldiers holding onto each other's gear. The air grew thick, smelling of copper and ancient dust. The vibration reached a crescendo, a bone-shaking roar that felt like it was trying to shake their atoms apart. And then the sound stopped. Varnum opened her eyes. They were no longer in a corridor. They stood on a narrow catwalk of black glass suspended over a vast circular chamber. In the center of the room, hovering in midair without any visible support, was a sphere of pure darkness, the Void Heart. Around the sphere, 12 massive pillars of light connected the floor to the ceiling, pulsing in time with the team's heartbeats. "Look," Harrison whispered, pointing to the base of the pillars. 4 figures were slumped there, encased in translucent, amber-like cocoons. They were wearing flight suits. The crew of Hawthorne 7. Their eyes were open, glowing with the same blue light that was now pulsing through Varnum's own veins. "They're alive," Harrison said, starting forward. "Wait." Varnum grabbed his rucksack. From the shadows behind the pillars, something began to emerge. It wasn't a monster, and it wasn't a man. It was a silhouette made of shifting fractals, a 3-dimensional shadow that moved with a terrifying, fluid grace. "It's a witness," Kale whispered, his voice trembling. "The one who watches the transition." The shadow figure didn't attack. It simply stood between them and the crew, and a voice not heard, but felt directly in the center of their brains spoke. "Why do you cling to the shell? The storm is coming. The cage is breaking. We offer the only path through the fire." Varnum raised her rifle, her glowing eyes narrowing. "We didn't ask for a path. We're taking our people home." The witness tilted its head, and the black sphere in the center of the room began to glow with a terrifying, blinding light. "You are already home," the voice echoed. "You just haven't learned to recognize the architecture yet." The air in the briefing room at Elmendorf Air Force Base didn't just feel cold. It felt sterile, like a morgue. Captain Celesta Varnum stood before a topographical map of the Alaskan interior, her eyes tracing the jagged, unforgiving lines of the Brooks Range. 12 years of service Iraq, Afghanistan, the humid jungles of Joint Ops had taught her to read a room as well as a map. The tension here was thick, vibrating with a frequency that didn't match a standard search and rescue. "Hawthorne 7 was a routine reconnaissance flight," Colonel Barnes said. His voice was a low rasp, and his breath hitched in the unheated room. 4 crew, mapping terrain, monitoring atmospheric conditions, standard, boring. Green planes don't vanish from radar at 18 or 47 hours without a distress call, sir. "Exactly," Barnes replied, tapping a finger on a blank white expanse on the map. "No beacon, no emergency frequency, just gone. You have a 6-hour weather window before a massive system locks that region down until spring. If you don't find them now, you're looking for frozen statues in May." Varnum didn't hesitate. She knew her team. She chose them not just for their skill, but for their ability to look at the impossible and keep their finger on the trigger. There was Lieutenant Orion Thorne, a scout who seemed to move through the world like a ghost, his eyes always scanning a horizon no one else could see. Sergeant Marisol Duvant, who could find a signal in a lead box. Dr. Felix Montrose, a civilian geophysicist whose presence was a request from the Pentagon that smelled like a demand. Rivera, the combat engineer, Harrison, the medic, Clove, the heavy weapons specialist who feared nothing human. Finally, there was Cale Tlinga, a local guide whose face was a map of Alaskan history. The insertion was a nightmare of white-knuckle piloting. As the Black Hawk hovered over a ridge that defied the helicopter's sensors, the magnetic readings began to scream. "Captain, 10 o'clock, half a mile out," Clove yelled over the rotor wash. Varnum squinted through the polarized glass. Against the blinding uniform white of the glacier, a jagged scar of black and gray appeared. It looked like a wound in the earth. The fuselage of Hawthorne 7 was crumpled against a boulder field, its wings sheared off like paper. "Terrain is too unstable to land," the pilot shouted. "Fast rope only. I can't stay in this interference for long. The bird is fighting me." One by one, they dropped. The wind tried to whip them into the granite teeth of the mountain, but they hit the snow with a crunch that seemed too loud for the vast silence of the wilderness. As the helicopter pulled away, the silence that rushed in was heavy, oppressive. It didn't feel like the absence of sound. It felt like something was holding its breath. "Spread out!" Varnum ordered, her voice cutting through the chill. "Harrison, check the fuselage. Duvant, find that black box. Clove, Rivera perimeter, now." As she walked toward the wreckage, the wrongness began to settle in her gut. The plane hadn't just crashed, it looked like it had been chewed. The metal was twisted in ways that didn't suggest a high-speed impact. It looked melted, yet cold. "Captain," Rivera called out. He was kneeling 20 yards from the main body of the plane. "You need to see this." Varnum trudged through the knee-deep snow. "These marks. They aren't debris trails. Deep geometric grooves that formed complex, repeating structures. They looked like cuneiform, but scaled to a size that was terrifying. They weren't random, they were precise. "It looks like writing," Rivera whispered, his hand hovering over a groove. "But who writes in a glacier, Captain?" Captain Duvant's voice crackled over the short-range comms, distorted by a layer of static that sounded like clicking teeth. "I've got the cockpit, but, sir, the electronics, they're fried, not from a fire. It looks like they were cooked from the inside out. The copper wiring has melted into patterns, the same patterns Rivera found in the ice." Varnum felt a prickle at the base of her skull. "Recent report." The medic emerged from the shattered tail section, his face ashen. He pulled his goggles up and his eyes were wide. "4 dead, Captain. Impact killed them, but that's not the story." "What is the story, Harrison?" "Their faces. I've seen pilots go down in flames. I've seen men hit by IEDs. Usually, there's a look of shock or grimace. These men, they look like they saw the end of the world. Their pupils are blown, and their skin, they have cellular damage consistent with a massive electromagnetic pulse, not thermal burns. It's like every cell in their body was vibrated until it broke." Cale Tlinga, who had been standing silently on the perimeter, walked toward them. He wasn't looking at the plane. He was looking up, toward the towering peaks that circled them like a crown of thorns. "This is Uke," Cale said softly. "The waiting place. My people have stories of this valley. Hunters who come here find things that aren't there the next day. They speak of a black mountain that appears and disappears." Montrose snapped, though his hands were shaking as he calibrated his sensors. "I've reviewed every topographical scan of this sector for the last 50 years. There is nothing here but ice." "Some things don't want to be found by your machines, Doctor," Cale replied, his voice steady. "They wait until they are woken. The Chinese tests in the 90s, the earth shook deep. It cracked the cradle." Duvant approached, holding a battered orange flight recorder. "I managed to bypass the fried circuits. I have the last 2 minutes of audio." The team gathered in a circle, the wind whistling through the hollow ribs of the crashed plane. Duvant hit play. The audio was a wall of static at first. Then, the pilot's voice, professional but strained. "Elmendorf, this is Hawthorne 7. We are experiencing extreme magnetic flux. Instruments are spinning. Wait, what the hell is that?" In the background, a low, rhythmic thumping began. It sounded like a giant heart beating against a drum. "Elmendorf, we have visual contact with a massive structure. It's not on the charts. It's black. It's absorbing the light. Coordinates are..." The pilot began to rattle off numbers, but they dissolved into a sound that made Rivera cover his ears. It wasn't a scream. It was a mechanical screeching, followed by the sound of the crew crying out not in pain, but in absolute soul-shattering terror. The recording cut out with the sound of tearing metal. Varnum looked at Montrose. "Doctor, those coordinates, where do they point?" Montrose checked his GPS, his face turning a shade of white that matched the snow. 3 miles northeast, higher elevation, near the summit of the ridge. "But there's nothing there," Clove said, patting the stock of his rifle. "We're going to find out," Varnum said, her voice hard. "Thorne, take point. Cale, stay with him. We move in 10. As they began the trek, the environment began to shift. It was subtle at first. The sound of the wind died down, replaced by a silence so absolute it made their ears ring. Their footsteps, which should have echoed off the granite walls, felt muffled, as if the air itself was becoming denser, thicker. "Anyone else having trouble breathing?" River wheezed. "Barometric pressure is spiking," Duvant noted, staring at her wrist-mounted sensor. "We're climbing, so the pressure should be dropping. Instead, it's reading like we're at the bottom of the ocean. My sensors are failing." Suddenly, Thorne stopped. He raised a hand. The team froze, weapons leveled.
What is it, Orion?
Varnum whispered. "The mountain," Thorne said, his voice trembling for the first time. "It's breathing." They all went still, and then they felt it. Not a sound, but a vibration through the soles of their boots, a slow, rhythmic heave of the earth. Rise, fall, rise, fall. It was exactly the frequency of the sound on the black box. "We need to turn back," Cale whispered, "before it notices us." "Before what notices us?" Rivera snapped. "The cage," Cale said, looking at the peaks around them. "You think these mountains are natural? They are a prison. My ancestors didn't live here. They built walls against this place. They knew what was buried, and we just walked into its mouth." Clove let out a muffled curse. "Captain, my rifle. The safety. It's engaging itself." Varnum looked at her own M4. Small arcs of static electricity were dancing along the barrel, blue and flickering. The metal felt warm, uncomfortably warm against her gloves. "Keep moving," Varnum commanded, though every instinct she had was screaming to run in the opposite direction. "We find what Hawthorne 7 saw. We find the source." The site that met them didn't belong in the 21st century. It didn't belong in this world. Embedded in the mountainside was a structure that defied every law of architecture. A pyramid, perfectly geometric, carved from a material so black it looked like a hole in reality. It was at least 300 feet tall, its surface smooth as glass, reflecting nothing. It didn't sit on the ice. It seemed to be emerging from it. "That's not possible," Montrose whispered, dropping to his knees. "The symmetry, the angles. It's a mirror of the Great Pyramid of Giza, but it's inverted. It's a negative." "It's a door," Thorne said, his eyes fixed on the apex of the black structure. "And it's opening." As he spoke, a low subsonic hum shook the very marrow of their bones. The black surface of the pyramid began to pulse with a faint inner light. And for the first time, Captain Varnum realized that the mission wasn't about a plane crash. It was about the end of everything they knew,